Hi, good evening, everybody. This is the 7-Eleven committee meeting to discuss the old Oxford site. We're waiting for a couple more minutes to see if we have another member or two to join us. Right, Jennifer, we still need one more?
I think we know that Stephanie's coming, so now you do have 7 that are committed to this evening. But I don't know, Rachel, we can't motion anything, right? All the action items, we can't be motioned for the minutes or the agenda. You're on mute.
Hi, thank you. That's good. You can start the meeting, etc. Is Dietmar now the only one that you're missing?
And Stephanie's coming later.
And Stephanie's coming later. Yeah. So
Ophir as well.
with fear as well. So yeah, I wouldn't take, you don't do things that you have to take action on until you get those 3 folks on.
Okay.
Oh,
So we
Dietmar's
call it
here.
Dietmar. Ooh. All right. So can I go ahead and start?
Yeah.
Okay.
We have
So-
7 now. Sorry.
We have 7. All right. So we're
And
gonna
then
go
you
ahead.
can take action if you want to.
Okay, cool. All right. We're gonna go ahead and do roll call. Excuse me. So please unmute and state here for the record. Kathy?
Here.
Dietmar?
Here.
James?
Here.
Kate?
Here.
Phyllis?
Here.
Stephanie is going to be coming later unless she came in. Yep. Win?
Here.
Ophir? No. Okay. All right. So we can go ahead and go to public comment, correct?
Mhm.
Is that we don't have to do any motion? And okay. All right. So bear with me while I pull my things up. All right. The committee hears public comment at each meeting. Excuse me, there are 2 opportunities for public comment at each meeting. The first is for agenda items, and the second is for non-agenda items. The committee chairperson, me, will introduce the allotted period of time for public comments, organize the comments, and indicate who will be speaking next. If you wish to speak, you must raise your hand before the comment period begins, so you can get in the line to speak. If you raise your hand after the comment period has started, you will likely not be able to speak during that comment period. Public comments are limited to 3 minutes per person unless there are too many people requesting to speak, in which case the committee chair may limit comments to less than 3 minutes per person. To raise your hand by video conference, when public comment is asked for, click on the participants button at the bottom of your screen and select raise your hand button to request to speak.
Great. And we do have one public comment. So I am going to, bear with me, I'm going to promote.
And Jennifer, I
Great.
have the timer ready so I can screen share, just so you know.
Oh, perfect. And let me allow to talk. Brandon, you should be able to start.
Okay, great. Hi, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. My name is Brandon Norris. I am the District 5 Director in Councilmember Hahn's office. Unfortunately, tonight, Sophie is in a council meeting right now and could not attend, but I did just want to pass along some of our frustration with this vote taking place before she was able to meet with any of you. And that's pretty much it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right, that is it.
Okay.
All right, Kel, you can stop sharing your screen. Perfect.
Okay. All right, so we're going to move ahead with item number 4, the approval of the agenda today. Is there someone who would like to make a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
A second.
Great, thank you. Roll call vote to approve the agenda. Kathy, oh, Kathy, do you still vote?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Kathy? Yes, she said yes.
Yes.
Dietmar,
Yes.
James,
Yes.
Kate,
Yes.
Phyllis,
Yes.
Stephanie.
She's still not here.
Okay, Win,
Yes.
Ophir.
He is not here.
Okay, so that means the agenda has been approved by the committee. Item number 5 is to adopt a resolution authorizing electronic meetings. This is just like we did this the same last time, just allowing us to do Zoom meetings. So is there someone who makes a motion to approve this resolution?
I make the motion.
I'll second.
Great, roll call vote. Kathy,
Yes.
Dietmar,
Yes.
James,
Yes.
Kate,
Yes.
Phyllis,
Yes.
Stephanie? I don't think she's here yet.
Still not here.
Okay, Win,
Yes.
Ophir?
Still not here.
Okay. All right, great, thank you. So the motion is passed. Number 6, approval of minutes from the November 16th, 2022 meeting. Is there someone who would like to make a motion to approve those minutes?
I so move.
A second,
A second.
and roll call vote to approve the minutes. Kathy,
Yes.
Dietmar,
Yes.
James? James?
He's there.
Sorry, yes,
Oh, sorry. Thank you. Kate,
Yes.
Phyllis,
Yes.
Stephanie, is she here yet?
Mm-mm.
Not yet. Win
Yes.
and Ophir, is he here yet?
No,
Nope.
sorry.
Okay. But the motion is approved to approve the November minutes. Okay, moving on to non-agenda public items. Keeping my notes. Please, all right, so we're going to open up for public comment not on the agenda. Please, anyone who has public comment not on the agenda, this is the time to state your comment. Please remember that the items discussed may only be at the purview of the committee. Any items not related to this committee, which is to only consider the use or disposition of the previous home to Oxford Elementary School located at 1130 Oxford Street, Berkeley, California, 94707, as it is no longer needed for school purposes, will not be able to be heard. All right, so with that, we open it up.
There is no no one for a non-agenda public comment.
All right. And then we move to agenda item, so thank you. Move to agenda item number 8, school site facilities information. We're going to introduce item and we're going to hand it over to Jennifer, and John might chime in. He's driving, so I think Jennifer's taking the lead on this.
Yeah, I'm going to take the lead. Thanks, Beth. So a couple of just follow-up items from our last meeting. There were a few items and they're listed in the minutes under discussion 9, item B on your minutes. We just wanted to discuss a few things with the committee regarding emergency services to the site and zoning and density information that was requested for the site. As the committee knows, their purview is understanding the use of the site for school purposes and whether to surplus or not to surplus. So in regards to emergency services or zoning, that would be handled by outside of this committee's purview. That would be something that the BUSD board, if they choose to move forward, if it's recommended that this is surplus, and then future opportunities for potential housing or different types of zoning, that would be done at the BUSD level of leadership. or in conjunction with either a future owner of the site, if that's the way that the BOSD board goes with your recommendation, if you choose to move forward with surplusing. So it's really handled at the city level. It's that would be under the city's purview, and you know, BUSD doesn't have any consideration in regards to emergency services and or zoning and density changes. Right now you're zoned at R1. Yes, Phyllis.
Hi, thank you. I was the one who raised some of those issues. And I guess my question is, let me just close the door.
No, that's okay.
I guess my question is, as it relates to our purpose, which is we declare it surplus if it no longer is necessary for BUSD's needs. If BUSD, like our police force and like many of our other public agencies, is losing employees because they can't afford to live in Berkeley, would this be serving its needs if it were to be designated either a lease site or a sold site for adding housing to its employees? In which case, our decision would need to be informed by the knowledge of, say, for instance, if the property remains in BUSD hands, does it have a more streamlined process for developing it? If the property were to be given or somehow leased on a less onerous basis to an affordable housing developer, what would an affordable housing development expert say in terms of that being able to jumpstart a development, which would also inform our decision as to whether or not this was necessary to BUSD's needs. So I just want to clarify, I'm not really interested in the granular zoning. I'm interested in how this property would fit into BUSD's needs and where do they stop?
That makes sense. I'm going to hand it over to Rachel with DWK, our legal counsel, and maybe she can add some clarity to this.
Yeah, sure. Jennifer and Phyllis, happy to jump in here. So with respect to the question that is before the 7-Eleven committee, is the property surplus to the district's educational needs? So that is not, workforce housing isn't an educational need for the district. So a couple of different ways to come at this. So number one, the district, there is legal authority right now that's available to the district called the 2016 Teacher Workforce Housing Act. Through that act, the district is authorized to pursue workforce housing on properties that it owns without going through the 7-Eleven committee process. So the district has that avenue available to it right now. If you're saying that you want to know whether the so let me step back a sec. So there's one avenue right there that for the district to use where you don't need to have a 7-Eleven committee. The other point is that it's for the district's educational purposes. That's a district determination as far as like, is it going to use it for literally classroom purposes or like a facility for maintenance courtyard, for those purposes of the district. So does that kind of help get to your question, or what is a little challenging? I was not at that part of the last meeting where you had your question exactly, but
I didn't. I emailed it. I did not.
Oh,
pose
okay.
it. Yeah.
Okay.
I guess it's a little confusing. Educational needs is not what I heard at first. I heard BUSD needs when we were discussing it before. So you're saying that they already have an avenue without declaring it surplus to go through. So that implies to us that they are not interested in building workforce housing, and this discussion is completely theoretical. I mean, that why would we need to declare a surplus for them to build workforce housing? We don't.
Well,
So
the district does not need that, but if what your committee is coming together and deciding and saying like, hey, we've looked at this, we think it's surplus to the district's needs, but we want workforce housing. We really think workforce housing is how this piece of property should be used. Well, then that's fine. That's absolutely fine and appropriate for you to make that recommendation and say, hey, look, we've met together. We've got our community feedback. We understand that you have another avenue through the Teacher Workforce Housing Act that you didn't need to impanelize us, but this is what we're recommending to you. So you have that power in this committee to make that your recommendation. And then the board will hear that recommendation and then make a decision. So, and that's kind of how it will go.
And
anyway.
If I can just chime in real quick, right? So Rachel, that's absolutely correct. And Phyllis, no, the board has not made a decision that they're not interested in doing that. That decision has not been made. That conversation hasn't been made. The first step is really to go through this 7-11 process, right? To decide if it is surplus. Let the board know what your recommendation is, but then at the same time, like Rachel is explaining, if the committee's recommendation is to explore workforce housing up there, they can make that recommendation to the board and then the board can explore it further.
So if we decided that it was not surplus, the board could still build workforce housing there.
Yes.
Okay.
As they could, even if you decided that it is surplus, they can do the same. Yes. Because you have to remember, this is just a recommendation to the board. It's not final decision as to what happens with the actual property, whether it be surplus or not. The purpose of this is to make a recommendation to the board from the community lens.
Well, I guess, again, it gets back to us having a better understanding of what this option might entail, such that I would say, for instance, if we could get some information about the 2016 Teacher Workforce Housing Act, which is the first I've heard of, but thank you so much for telling me about that.
Yeah.
What those parameters are and how they might overlay on what we're talking about on this property. So if it's completely not even, whatever, let's not go there. If there's things that say, well, there's a preference given to long-term lease, or it's a preference given to, that's those kinds of questions. Again, not zoning, just the whole, where's this property going? What does the ownership change do to the various options that we're considering? So that would be.
Yeah. Sure, we can give a little bit of information about the Teacher Workforce Act of 2016. And to your broader point, I think we're going to hit upon some of your questions, overarching questions, when we talk about 2295, when we talk about the legislation in a little bit.
That was my other question. Thank you. Perfect. Thanks.
Dimar, you have your hand up?
Yes, and that's a question for Rachel. So that the 2016 Teacher Workforce Housing Act, is that related or the same as AB 2295, or are these two different things?
So they're two different things, right? So the teacher that can kind of go in tandem, but they're different pieces of legislation, right? So the 2016 Teacher Workforce Housing provided a set of abilities and preferences for school districts, mechanisms through which school districts could have an easier time developing workforce housing. AB 2295 is a specific new piece of legislation that's going in. We'll get into this in detail in my presentation. That's going into effect in 2024. That is allowing a streamlining of the zoning. If you need a zoning designation, it's trying to allow for a streamline of that. So if you're working in the 2016 Teacher Workforce Housing rubric, the school district doesn't have the authority that will come at play with 2295 to try to bypass the local zoning. Does that make sense to you? So 2016 sets a framework. It's a preference. This is what the state is interested in moving forward, and having districts have an easier ability to do that. Even within that whole framework, it can take a number of years to get a workforce housing project through the pipeline. So what 2295 is doing is adding to the government code some provisions where if you're project, again, we'll get into this in details. If the project qualifies based on these 10 specific criteria, then then a district has the ability to try to truncate that time frame by getting an administrative approval with respect to the zoning, right? The law is saying if it's district property, you can do, if you meet these criteria, you can do, it's an allowable use.
I want you to be able to get into your presentation.
Yeah, so
Rachel,
we'll cover all this.
Yeah, and the last item that that came up at last meeting, I just wanted to get clarity, was in regards to the appraisal and the park use, and I want to just share my screen real quick, so that, and it is on. Sorry, I am on. It is in your it is in the appraisal under as improved section, and it really has to do with the opinion of the appraiser, the highest and best use for the site as improved in functionality and physical obsolete facility to remain vacant until it can be demolished and the site can be reused for housing development. Public use, such as a park serving the community, could not be supported with the standard valuation methodology. And so that was just clarification in regards to the comment that was made at the last meeting. I want to make sure everybody had that. All right. Oh, yep, Dietmar, sorry.
Just really quickly to dovetail into where Phyllis was going with that. I mean, and I think we talked about that earlier. I'm not entirely sure whether that was in one of our pre-meetings, the agenda meetings between you and chair and co-chair. But basically the surplus, just my understanding of that is basically the surplus definition is only about the question whether the core educational purpose should be continued on that side. So basically our vote saying yes would mean that we endorse future use for education, meaning students on site. If we vote no, then we're saying no, but that does not force a sale, so to speak. Surplus does not mean a sale. It just means it can stay within the district, and it could be leased or it could be used for something else, but not students on site. And I'm looking forward to this presentation now, because my understanding of AB 2295 is that in order for the streamlining to take effect, it needs to be in ownership and not sold to another entity for this to kick in. But, you know, so I'm looking really forward to that presentation. Thank you.
Great.
Perfect.
And Dietmar, one clarification, the district could use, this site is has a lot of geological issues and other items that have been disclosed in the reports that you have. In the overarching theory of surplus, if the district, it's not just that a school could be there, but if the district office could be there, you know, so we'll get into it further in my
Yes, Rachel. Rachel has a really great presentation. So that's all from John and I in regards to just some clarifications from last meeting. I'll hand it back to Beth.
All right, thank you. So moving on to agenda item number 9, the district legal counsel presentation. We're going to talk about that item and presentation on zoning legislation. That's it.
Okay, great.
Yep.
It's all yours.
So I can screen share. I believe that I have,
I think I gave you rights.
yeah, I think so. Perfect. And let me just share, make sure I'm sharing the right one. Share. Can you all see my presentation? Great. Okay. All right. So what we're going to talk about, let's go into, hold on one second. I'm just going to start the slideshow mode. And then I'm going to pull it. Okay. Okay, we're going to talk about 2 main pieces of legislation this evening, Assembly Bill 2295 and Senate Bill 9. Assembly Actually, I should start with a kind of a framework around this, just for clarification. This Assembly Bill 2295 is focused, it's an attempt by the legislature to help streamline the process for the development of workforce housing projects. As we have indicated in earlier meetings and in this meeting, the district, the 7-11 committee, you don't need a 7-11 committee. The district already has the authority. So the district now has authority under the Teacher Workforce Housing Act of 2016. So to the extent Assembly Bill 2295, when that goes into effect, the district already has access to use the benefits of this legislation. But just so that we're clear, what is this legislation? So it's a bill that is going to go into effect on January 1st, 2024. So it's right, there's about a year away from when it will be effective, even though it's been signed into law. And what this bill does is it allows school districts who own property in the state of California to have, if they are creating a workforce housing project, and if it meets a list of designated criteria, that particular project, which we'll walk through at a high level as we go through, then the school district does not need to get permission from the local jurisdiction with respect to the zoning. With respect to the zone, the construction of a workforce housing project, which it would be a higher density use of a parcel than would generally be how most school district parcels are zoned in the state of California. For example, this Oxford site is a R18 designation, so that the workforce housing project, if there were to be a workforce housing project at that site, the density would be much higher. So, but for this bill going into effect, the school district would have to work with the local jurisdiction to go through a process to get an amendment or a change to the zoning, potentially an amendment to the general plan. So this is kind of what this is. It's again, this attempt to kind of help move projects along in a more timely pace. And then this bill also exempts certain requirements from the Surplus Land Act for those projects as well. So the existing law, I kind of just went through this, but the existing law is that a local educational agency, LEA, that's a local educational agency, for example, BUSD, they have to comply with the county, city, and county zoning ordinances, right? So whatever the property is zoned for, there have to be their projects and developments have to be in accordance with that. There is an exception to that rule that school districts, there's a statutory exception right now that is available to school districts, has been for a long time, where by a 2/3 vote of their board of education, they can exempt themselves from local zoning and county zoning for projects where it's literally a school site. Not talking about a district office, not talking about a maintenance courtyard, any of that. But if it's a site that they're going to put a school on, the district has the ability to exempt itself from local zoning. Workforcing housing is not considered a classroom use, right? Obviously, students aren't there. It's not for students. It's for the workforce. So there is no way, at the way the legislature is right now, or the way the law is, for a district to vote to exempt itself from local zoning. It has to follow it, right? And then that's where you get, at this point, the way it stands is, to the extent a district owns a piece of property where it has the proper zoning for the higher density zoning, then sure, it can go ahead and start working on developing workforce housing project more concretely. But if they don't have that type of property, for example, in this case, it's zoned with this R18 with a hillside overlay, they need to work with the local jurisdiction to make the changes that they would need to make for the desired density. And that's it's a process, right? There are public hearings as part of that process, recommendations through, it can take a lengthy period of time, right? And so 22, and this is just, kind of a quick overview for what's available at Oxford, right? The current zoning and allowable uses is not such that you could have a workforce housing complex on there. This bill is trying to make it more accessible, workforce housing projects more accessible across the state. And so to the extent a parcel is owned by a school district and it meets the criteria that we're going to briefly go through, then, like I'm saying, the district can, there's a ministerial approval. So the zoning, the workforce housing is considered an allowable use, right? So it would, I'm trying to go back, but shoot. Hold on, let me just go for it. So I just want to show you how that would change. So like these allowable uses, that's what we're talking about. It's not allowable now, but that would be what would happen if the project qualified for 2295. So again, this starts in January 1, 2024. And then here are there's 10 specific criteria that a project will need to meet, and we can just go over them. We don't need to get into the minutia too much, but the district the housing development has to have at least 10 units. They have to have, the housing development must have a deed recorded, a deed restriction for a period of at least 55 years. And that deed, the restriction has to do with the type of housing that's going to be available in there, right? It has to have the majority of units set at an affordable rent from lower income to moderate income houses. And then at least 30% of the units should be affordable to lower income housing. So these numbers are tied into federal numbers that are distributed, and then the state of California also distributes basically medium incomes for specific counties, and that's sort of where you're getting at that's how you would do it. There's a whole calculation you could be made. One thing that can be tricky is even though district staff and employees may not be making a tremendous amount of money, sometimes the calculations are such that they actually may be above the income limit for some of these calculations. But again, that's really diving into it a bit. That would come into play with an analysis once you've kind of made a decision that you're investigating the district at the district level, that they're going to investigate workforce housing on a particular site. And then this is how the renting of the units needs to be processed with respect to this. So first it's going to the LEA. Those employees, if they don't fill up, then adjacent employees from an adjacent LEA, then public employees, then general members of the public. And then if units become unoccupied, you're back to the first local agencies. Employees get first dib at that. So, and then there are restrictions with respect to the residential density, the height limit that the development can be. So again, and then a few more, the property, in order to be available for this, the property has to be adjacent to a property that permits residential use as a principally permitted use. The property is located on an infill site. The housing has satisfied the other local objective zoning standards and subdivision standards and design review. So the district gets a streamline at an allowable use, but that certainly that's not the end of the conversation. There still is input from the local jurisdiction in the project. Again, because it's not a facility where students will be, the district can exempt itself out from other ordinances or local rule. There is no DSA that would be doing the project, right? That is overseeing the project as opposed to a local jurisdiction. A local jurisdiction would be overseeing the project.
Rachel, could you go back to the previous screen?
Yeah, for some reason though, I'm having trouble getting it to go back. So I'll just have to go.
While you do that, can I ask, what's an infill site? I don't know what that is.
Oh yeah, so there is actually it's literally just defined in the statute, and there's this, I can send you a copy of what that is or provide it to Jennifer, but there's just literally a statutory definition as far as like what that means, what it means to be an infill site in this context. But hold on, Dietmar, I'm trying to.
Sorry, I didn't mean to disrespect the deep
No,
question there.
it's-
Just trying to figure that.
No, and we can get that to for the committee. There's different opportunities when
Oh,
the
definitely.
city or county goes through a housing element. So they take different parts of their city and they say, oh, this could be for infill, for, you know, they're trying to gather growth in that area. So, but we'll get you specific definition.
Could you go
One back, sure, yes. The density. So here we have the density requirement and the height requirement. So the residential density for the housing development as measured by the development footprint, it has to be the greater of the following. The residential density allowed on the parcel by the city or county as applicable, or the applicable density deemed appropriate to accommodate housing for lower income households in that jurisdiction as specified as in this government code section. So do you have a specific question about that, or the height limit, they have to,
Yeah,
Yeah.
the question would be that provision 4B. I'm not sure what subdivision paragraph 3, subdivision C of section 65. That's probably the health and safety code or so, but
yeah,
so what that entails, basically.
yeah. And that would be jurisdiction specific, right? Because it's what the housing for lower income households in that specific jurisdiction. So we could, you know, to the extent there's an interest finding out what the density is for lower income housing households in the Alameda County jurisdiction, we could try to get that information for you. I don't know it off the top of my head.
Yeah, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Okay. All right.
And in your packet, Rachel did have like a AB
Oh, yeah, there's a handout.
2295 kind of overview cheat sheet. So look at that. That may have some information.
That has additional detail. I just took like the high level bullet points for this presentation. So, and then again, so we kind of talked through all three of these, the infill.
Can I have one other quick question on Beth's question about the infill?
Yeah.
The planning commission just, I assume, approved the latest housing element from the city, and I guess it's going to council. I'm not sure when. Maybe somebody knows. I am not sure that I understand that there are actual areas that are called infill areas, or if the planners designate it as an infill element. I mean, my feeling about infill is, well, it's not a greenfield and it's not commercial that's being changed into residential. Is that the general gist? I don't want to tie you to the code. I don't want you to have to blur that, but if that's the general intent, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay.
I don't. Yeah, I can get you more specific information. There's a little bit more in the actual handout itself, but
okay.
we can also
I'll look at that. Yeah.
look to local. Okay.
But for Beth's question, that's generally what.
Yes. Yes. Exactly. Yes. At a high. Exactly.
And real quick, Rachel, Stephanie has her hand up.
Oh,
Stephanie?
okay. Sorry, I'm not seeing that.
Let me unmute. Ask you to unmute.
I'm sorry, I'm having a lot of trouble here.
That's okay.
I apologize for being late, and I may have missed. All of this refers to if the school district was going to build housing on that site. Is that correct?
Yeah. Any what this legislation is for school districts in the state, up and down the state of California. If they have a piece of property that they own, this allows Assembly Bill 2295, which goes into effect in 2024, it allows them to consider workforce housing as an allowable use on the property that they own, provided it meets these 10 pretty specific criteria, provided the project meets this kind of criteria that's listed out in the statute. So that is, yes, it is assuming that the parcel, the property title is held by the district.
And the second part of that is that is a decision that the board would make. Is that correct?
As far as,
I mean, it's out of
Yes.
our hands.
yes.
Yes, you are correct, Stephanie. That would be a board decision that would be made.
Our responsibility is to advise them to sell it or keep it, basically, right?
Well, what you've been impaneled to do is make a recommendation with respect to whether the site is surplus to the district's educational needs. So is it certain, does the district need the property for, educational purposes? So then you would make a recommendation, yes or no. If you're saying it's surplus, then it sounds like there's been a lot of talk about workforce housing. If the recommendation is surplus and this committee really wants to make a recommendation that you look into workforce housing or try to pursue workforce housing or whatever, that goes to the board as part of your report and is presented to the board. And then the board ultimately makes a decision. Are they going to declare the property surplus or not? So that's a board decision. And then part of the conversation you had earlier, just to bring you full circle, is the board already has authority through which they can move forward with teacher housing, workforce housing. There's other statutes at play that allow them to do that without having to impanel a 7-Eleven committee. So, but irregardless of that, it can still be a recommendation that this committee is saying we're really interested in workforce housing, and this is what we would recommend you do. But the ultimate decision is a board decision.
Dietmar has his hand up too.
Okay.
Thank you. Rachel, one question on the 2024 effective date, so to speak. Does that apply to the process starting or a building permit being applied for? What is the trigger date that cannot happen before January 1st of 2024?
Yeah, that's a good question. And the project, whatever it is, won't be eligible to bypass this zoning, get a ministerial approval, right? So you could investigate and start working up a project, but you wouldn't be, the timing is, you're not going to be able to speed up time. If you start a project now, you still would be waiting either to see if you finish the existing process that's in law, the existing law, or waiting till in January. And in that point in time, if that's when you are going forward and applying for the zoning, if that's when it would happen in your timeline for your project, then that's how it would play out. You don't have to, it's not going to be, that's basically the point at which this year is kind of a notice to there's a notice provision that the state's going to have to provide to everyone to let folks know that this is going to be happening in the procedure, et cetera. But just because you start a project in 20, so just because you start a project January 1st, 2024, are you immediately going to be at the point where you're going to be able to, the district able to take advantage of 2295? Well, probably not. There's probably a little bit of work that needs to go in.
I think that answers it. It's basically, it's that point at which you submit for a ministerial approval. So in other words, what we're doing now, even talking about it or sending a recommendation to the board, and if the board debates this and votes one way or another with like an like statement of intent or whatever in March of 2023, say, then that does not kick them out of the process. It's really the trigger date is when you apply to obtain a ministerial approval under the streamlined provisions.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Stephanie, I'm sorry, did I cut you off? Did you get all your questions answered?
Yes.
Okay,
Okay, perfect. Kate, did you want to say something? Rachel has just a few more slides, so.
Yeah, no, you answered my question. I'd love to see the last slide in your deck.
Oh, okay, perfect. So then, again, just some other, you got to check off all the boxes in order for in order to get the bypass on an allowable use. And then Senate Bill 9. So what this is a bill that is already in effect. It was passed in 2021. It went into effect in 2021. It's in law. I think it was passed in 2021 and maybe effective 2022. But what this allows for is that this is not just applying to school districts. By the way, this is a statewide piece of legislation. So this is called the California Housing Opportunity and More Efficiency Act. And this, again, is a kind of a streamlined process. It's trying to come at the issue of lack of affordable housing in the state of California through a many-pronged approach. What this prong approach does is it allows, it streamlines the process. If you are a homeowner, where you can create a duplex, or subdivide an existing lot if the parcel meets specific qualifications. And then again, this is sort of a thing where you're getting a ministerial approval instead of having to go through the full on public notice. It's just a truncated period. This is available right now. It's not specific to school districts, but basically the idea is that for a particular parcel, if you own a particular parcel, you could, the potential to have ultimately a lot split and a duplex on each of them. So there could be potentially 4 units on one parcel that is a parcel that is been designated for residential R1. So that's what this is about. This, we were just asked to talk about this briefly. I don't know that this plays very much into the current situation, but. And that's it. Oh, no. Okay. Oh, one other point. So this too has a list of qualifications too. So for this one, you're not going to be able to have this ministerial approval if you're the plot that you own, the land that you own, it first of all has to be located within an urbanized area or urban cluster, and it can't be located in any of these locations, right? So a hazardous waste site, an earthquake fault zone, land within 100-year floodplain or floodway, land. So again, this is just sort of noting that there are limits on this provision too, or with this authority. It's not a carte blanche for if you own a piece of property, you can automatically, do a lot split and construct duplex multi-unit on in single residential.
Yeah, and this legislation was recently passed, so I think it's moving towards, as we all know, we're in a housing crisis, so that was the initiative behind this opportunity. I think Dietmar was first. Sorry, I wasn't looking, and then Kate.
Yeah, question on this one is one of the kind of exclusion criteria is land within a very high fire hazard severity zone.
Mm-hmm.
And just to be clear, correct me if I'm wrong, I think this does not apply here. It is a fire zone, it's fire zone 2, which is a high fire zone. I think the only area in Berkeley that is considered a very high fire hazard severity zone, I think is behind the Cal Stadium, like the Prospect Hill area. But I think that's something we need to be aware of.
Yes, I couldn't speak to specifically in Berkeley where there's very high fire hazard severity zone. We could certainly look to make that determination, but I couldn't speak to it off the top.
Kate, go ahead.
That was one of my questions also, and whether, I know we're in a big slide zone, does this count as an earthquake fault zone? And does this list of exclusions also apply to the prior legislation we were talking about?
No, this is not, this is separate and apart from the prior legislation. So that legislation doesn't have this particular list of exclusions to it. There were other parameters that would have prevented, that would by de facto, that you wouldn't be able to do it in some of these areas. For example, the prime farmland or farmland of statewide importance. There was restrictions on where the development had to be adjacent to property that was zoned residential, for example. So chances are the farmland may not be next to, so if it was farmland, it may not
Wouldn't be infill.
Yeah, so exactly. So there's this list. I want to be very clear. It's very specific to this bill, but that doesn't mean that some of the legislature didn't kind of consider some of these kind of parameters, and that they would be come at it through a different way in the SB 2295, because that's a pretty robust list. That those criteria are pretty robust, right? Not all projects are going to be able to meet that level, those criteria, right? So it's not that 2295, has it, you have to make the threshold that your project would qualify for all of the criteria. So.
And again, 2295 and SB 9 would be considered at the board level. Again, this is just information for the committee, but remember that would be something that the board would move forward with after your recommendation. James, your hand's up.
Yeah, I was curious about the earthquake fault zone, but I think Kate asked that same question. So
okay, perfect. All right.
Yeah, you do all have that geological hazard report, I believe, was uploaded to that may have more specificity on the fault zone question.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rachel.
Yes, you're welcome.
All right, we good? Thank you. That was very informative. I've certainly learned a lot on this. Probably more than I was ready to. So we'd like to move on to agenda item number 10 to actually take some action for our committee to vote to determine if the previous home to Oxford Elementary School located at 1130 Oxford Street should be deemed surplus property. Are we ready to do that vote?
Yes.
All right, fabulous. Okay, I'm pulling up my notes to make sure I do it right. Okay, so after hearing the information from legal, clarity on the process, and additional information on the property, I would like to ask the committee if we have a motion to surplus the Oxford Elementary School property located at 1130 Oxford Street, Berkeley, California, 94707. So we make a motion, or do we motion?
So moved.
Stephanie made the motion.
A second?
I'll second.
All right. So if
So now it's a roll call.
so
Excuse me. There can be discussion and then there's a roll call. Excuse me.
okay, is there any discussion about?
Dietmar has his hand up.
Oh, Dietmar, go for it.
Yeah, I have a question. Are we like voting on that before kind of at least having a draft layout of the recommendations that we want to attach to the recommendation or to the surplus designation?
Yes, I believe so, right, Jennifer? So we declare that and then we take that next step about the recommendation. Does that seem okay for you, Dietmar?
Yeah, that's fine. I was just wondering about the process. Okay.
Yeah, the template that's been provided, I think you guys are going to cover. It's what is the finding surplus. You seem to be voting on the site is surplus, and then second thing that you would want to walk through the board would be all your recommendations, and not that it would just be one recommendation. There may be multiple recommendations. In fact, that's probably good to have multiple recommendations.
And that be something that we work on at the next meeting, would it,
Yes.
to really clarify the recommendations?
Yes,
Okay.
the next item on the agenda tonight, we'll review the sample, and then at the next meeting, it was, discussed in the format of these meetings that would be a working meeting, that the committee would come and we'd work through drafting that recommendation.
So in this roll call vote, people will say yes if they're voting for it to be surplus and nay if no. Okay, all right, just want to make sure I got it right. Okay, so going roll call. So after hearing the information, I'd like to ask committee if we have a motion. Oh, we did that. So roll call vote. Kathy,
Yes.
Dietmar,
Yes.
James,
Yes.
Kate,
Yes.
Phyllis,
Yes.
Stephanie,
Yes.
Wynn.
Yes.
Oh, and do I ask Ophir or is?
Yeah, he's a committee member.
Okay. I wasn't
Yes.
sure if he was alternate. Ophir,
Yes.
and I'm a yes. So it's a unanimous decision to surplus the property. Okay,
Hey,
great. All right, so we move to agenda item number 11, to review the draft of the committee recommendation report template. So I guess legal counsel is going to walk through the sample report and they'll highlight the key areas. All right, I'll hand
Rachel,
it.
do you want to share your screen?
I don't have that,
Okay,
the-
Jen,
that
can you
template pulled up, but I
Jen,
can
can you
walk
share
through
your
it.
screen? Or do you want me to share?
No, give me 1 second. Is it the,
It should be the Word document.
okay, give me 1 second.
Mhm.
So what we're gonna do with this is a sample from Cupertino, the process that they went through, and Rachel's gonna walk us through areas that some is boilerplate and some are areas that the committee has the opportunity, like the executive summary, the recommendation, there's different areas. So Rachel's gonna walk us through those areas. And really this opportunity here tonight is just to get a lay of a feel of how the layout of this draft report is. And then between this meeting and our January 11th meeting, take some time to review it in more detail. And then we'll come back at the January 11th meeting and really work on formulating your recommendation.
Yeah, and hold on 1 sec too. I actually have something better that I can pull up that did have a lot of the information that I had populated over. So, so I think that would be more useful
for this discussion. That's fine. Go ahead.
But hold on 1 sec. I will have to pull that up. Apologies. Okay, so hold on 1 sec.
We are in the time schedule.
Yes. Okay. So
I'm an elementary principal. I like to run things tight.
yes, I was not realizing that. Okay. Okay. So let's do. Okay, here it is. Okay, so. Okay. All right. So if you could, I can share the screen again, then I'll.
I think you have access.
Okay, perfect. Okay.
Do you?
Okay. All right, do folks see that BUSD
Yep.
template? Okay. All right, so let me just move it so I can.
Can it be a little bit bigger by chance?
Yes, hold on. As soon as I get it in a better spot for me to. Okay, so I can increase the size of it. So tell me, that's about 120%. Do you want it folks bigger than that or?
Let's see some of the printing.
Okay. 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 All right. So this is just following the kind of format that Cupertino did as a recent 7-Eleven committee. So this is what the lead up will be, just a listing of who participate, who are the committee members, who are the board members that report is being prepared to, who was the facilitator, who was involved. The table of contents would be updated, but how these reports typically start, there's an executive summary talking about what is the legal requirement, why would you have an impaneling of a 7-Eleven committee, and what is the legal, what are they legally required to do? So this is sort of provides that background, and it's populated with some information about the timeline for this particular 7-Eleven committee, and it has a little bit of information about the original committee that was impaneled, and Georgia was unable to continue, so Ophir was then brought in, and of course you are all welcome to add additional detail. Then it talks about what the meetings that this committee held, and then it's sort of, after this is just the executive summary. So then at the high level, what was your recommendation, right? So you just voted that the recommendation, the site would be declared surplus, and then you may have further recommendation with respect to what you recommend the district look to do with the parcel. Again, this is just walking through what the purpose. Now we're going into the actual more details of each section. What's the purpose of the committee? Who is the membership? How you legally, which rubric you fit into, which are the categories. Some of you might need to make a little edits as far as the specific area of expertise. So planning expertise, I think there was architectural expertise anyway, so there can be edits with respect to that. This is just kind of, just making sure it's very clear that all the procedures that are required by the law were followed, that you did impanel a certain number of committee members, they did have their representative of the community, they have this level of expertise, and then this is kind of the description of the process for this surplus property disposition process. The charge to the committee, these are the legal statutory requirements that's kind of bulleted for you. And then this is kind of where you will really need to get in your working session next time. And this is a summary of your work, right? So we put in a little bit of information. We know where we can get the agendas. It's on the BUSD website for the 7-Eleven committee, et cetera. But then you'll need to populate what are the things that were covered at each of your meetings. And we put in some bullet points, but this is, additional detail certainly is recommended, warranted, whatever you want to input in here to make it your report and emblematic of the work that you all did as a community. So as a committee. So we just kind of delineated each particular meeting. We want to let folks know what the overarching topics were that were discussed and covered. And so we walked through that, and then we wanted to provide, easy reference for the board, specific details of the property, right? As picture what the zoning currently is, then you'll see about what's the committee recommendation, and that hasn't been entered yet, but what's your recommendation? Then there's priority uses that you're recommending, that's where you would put in a section. So again, this is sort of like a snapshot for the board. This is probably a sheet that would be used when you actually do a presentation to the board. That's an encapsulation of this report. Again, we go back through some of the legal definitions that informed your work, right? So we talked about what the surplus lands mean, the highest and best use, some of the definitions we provided from case law and the AI Appraisal Institute. And this is something for you to consider if there were certain policy considerations that you were working together as a group that you felt were kind of guiding your process. Then we want to have information about what are the manner in which you sought or the committee sought input from the public, or how did you let the public know about your public hearing? And there's it's been on the district website, but there were earlier discussions about folks maybe doing a blast or someone sending it to their, a notice to their local neighborhood group that this meeting is going to have this particular meeting, there will be, you know, a public meeting held with respect to the report. So that's where we just want to make sure that you can show folks how people knew, how did the community know about your public hearing, just to be transparent with your constituents and community. And then so this is a section where you would then talk about your findings. So your finding, you just voted that you would declare the property as surplus. So that would be a finding. And then what are your recommendations, right? So what do you want to do? You know, what are the priority uses? What would you like to tell the board? Yeah, we think this parcel is property surplus to their needs. And we really think it would be useful for this to be workforce housing. We really think this would be useful to, you know, we're uncertain about whether the land is developable or not. We think you should sell it. We think you should lease it for 100 years. We think you should look to have other kinds of community services on this particular parcel. We want you to restrict it. We don't want you to enter into any kind of agreements with a charter school or various things like this is kind of what you could do. Now this priority, the following priority uses are aligned with the property zoning. That would be if there are particular uses that are aligned with the property's current zoning that you were interested in recommending. I mean, this is again just a sample. You can complete it, flesh it out with whatever you feel like is important. And then you basically just a kind of identify again that this will be ultimately signed by Beth, but all of you will participate in the preparation of this document. And then you will want to have all the meeting minutes, all the meeting agendas, you know, information about current and projected enrollments to the extent you delved into that, you know, photographs, depictions of the property, documents available and evaluated by your committee. So that's where you're going to want to have as attachment, just for the sake of, I guess, you know, clarity of what was the information you considered. There is an index and binder online with all the documents that the committee has available to them. So that would be good to have, whether it is a physical, you know, typically we attach physical photos, but when it gets to, we may have a link, or there may be a particular, like how those documents are all attached.
Yeah, staff will be supporting that process and making sure that all the documents are available either in a supplemental, you know, appendix document, or like you said, via a link. So yes, the committee doesn't have to worry about that. It just, if there's anything on the list that they'd like additionally, we would need to know.
Yeah, exactly. So that's sort of the overarching draft of the report. From when you finalize your report, from that there would typically be a slide deck that is generated for to kind of serve when the committee chair is presenting the board's recommendation to the school board.
Yes, and staff will help prepare that presentation for the chair and co-chair when they present to the school board, when they present their report as their recommendation.
Yeah, so that's kind of how that sort of gives you a global sense of what you need to flesh out, and whatever else you want to, you know, add.
Stephanie has her hand up, and then Phyllis.
I have two questions. One is, my memory was that we agreed that we would try to make our decisions unanimous. Is that correct, Beth? You remember that?
I don't remember that. At least we were unanimous on the surplusing. I
You
think,
know,
Okay, I couldn't be sure.
yeah, I don't remember that.
to the extent that is something you agreed upon, I'm not sure. You could probably look back in the minutes, maybe potentially to get a sense of that. That could be maybe one of the policy considerations that you were working with as a group.
I'm not recommending it. I'm just
Yeah.
asking.
Okay.
Stephanie will confirm in the recording of the first meeting. So we
Right.
can, staff can look back at that.
My second question is there any, should the board decide to sell the property, other than the list of who gets to say yes first?
Mhm.
Is there a restriction on what the district can do with the proceeds from the sale?
Yes, so yes, that's a good question. And this is something I think we covered a couple meetings ago, but so if you were to sell the property that is going that cannot go in your general fund, those funds have to be put aside for capital improvements or capital projects, or it could go towards the purchase of another property. If the recommendation is you're going to lease the property, leasing, if the district lease the property, that's considered a regular income stream. That income stream could be used could be deposited in the district's general fund. So there are distinctions depending on the disposition about where those funds can be expended by the district.
I'm sorry, I'm confused. Capital projects could be, for example, improvements or let's take the theater at the high school. Could we spend money on requirements of the theater in the high school?
Stephanie, let me answer that in a simple way. All the capital improvements is basically everything that's done out of facilities that you were helpful with when you were on the CBOC.
Thank you. Okay, I'm good.
Great. Phyllis and
Hi.
Jennifer had to leave us to go to her son's event. So,
Well, good for her.
yeah.
Yeah, much more important than this.
Yeah.
Thank you, Rachel. It's been a big help. Quick question, just in theory, after that last thing about the proceeds. In theory, if they built workforce housing and people were paying rent, and there was some money left over, that could go to the general fund. But anyway, that's just a silly hypothetical.
Yeah, a
So
couple of
it could theoretically, but I'll tell you just from the cost of workforce housing to build, Phyllis, and the way that the financing structures work, it would probably take somewhere between 80 and 99 years before we actually saw that would actually start generating a profit.
Yeah.
Okay. So more to the point. Thank you, John. I understand after having gone through the workforce housing that's being built on the adult school.
Yeah.
And good luck with the inflation that's hit since you got your first round of funding. That's a killer. And interest rates, and workforce and availability of labor and materials. So just in terms of the template thing, I would love to see a filled out one of these, even if it's not from our district, just to get a sense of.
Sure.
Yeah.
Jennifer, the one that she was originally sharing, I think it's in your packet, that's a completely filled out one.
Yeah, just a kind of feeling of
absolutely, yeah. And
perfect. Thank you.
See, that one had examples of priority uses that they wanted. It had restrictions that they didn't want. Exactly. So yeah,
perfect.
That's
wonderful,
available.
Rachel.
Thanks, and Rachel. I'll make sure, Phyllis, that I'll resend this template and the draft template to the committee just to make sure everybody has a copy.
Great, thanks.
So our time now is to sort of have a discussion about the template, some of the information. So just, as the questions come up, I have a question. I hope I don't open a can of worms. What's the benefit of leasing it versus selling it?
Okay, so that's a good question. From a legal perspective, if you lease the property, you maintain your right to title. So you have that, you maintain that property interest. If you sell it, you don't maintain the property interest long-term, but it kind of depends on what the, yeah, John can speak. to value.
There is actually a negative to leasing it over selling it that often gets overlooked. If this is declared as surplus property, which we can't use it for an educational purpose, but if the district maintains it, that actually becomes problematic when we apply for state funding for facilities projects. So to give you an idea, in the last 4 years, we have captured roughly 45 million in state funding that we've received, with about another 20 million sitting in the hopper just waiting for allocation, right? The moment that the district has property that it's surplus, that it's leasing out, that it's not using for educational purposes, then it becomes more problematic for us to apply for and to capture state funding as it relates to facilities. So our ability to actually leverage our bond funds changes, and the burden of those capital projects then falls more on the burden of the bond, right? Where we don't get to capitalize on that state money, and it's more to the local taxpayer. Because we have to fill out a form every year with the Office of Public School Construction as to whether or not we have declared surplus property that we're just sitting on.
Thank you, John. Dietmar and then Phyllis.
So question like directly back to John, does that limitation in terms of raising state funds hinge only on the formal declaration of it being surplus or not, or the actual use on it?
No, it's not only on the formal declaration. It's really about if the property is just sitting there unused and not being used for anything. Now, if it's being used for storage, just as an example, then it's being used and it's not just sitting wasting, right? But the moment that we have this unused site now up at Oxford that's not being used. So to hold it or to lease it to generate revenue, and the revenue piece I have to look into further, but I'm pretty sure that creates the same problem with our ability to apply for the state funding.
And if I may follow up right away, would the future prospect of workforce housing solve that problem? If it were used in the long run for workforce housing, would that hamper your ability to obtain state funds?
No, depending upon how the workforce housing is developed, right? The financing structure and whatnot, no. But again, that's just about the question as to whether or not we just lease it out to Dietmar, for example, right? It's,
oh yeah, great.
right. So, but you know, so if the district if the board chooses to explore to use this for workforce housing, and then were to choose actually to go down that route, that will not impede on our ability to apply for state funds.
So in other words, for the next year, you could just store, I don't know, surplus chairs and tables there, that's the school use. And then after that, it's workforce housing, then it would not be a problem for obtaining state funds in the long run. And because I think the key question, right, which I heard earlier in the terms of AB, and that's maybe something that Rachel needs to confirm again, that AB 2295 is only applicable to land owned by the school district. So if it's sold, and then let's say Saha were to develop that for housing, whether or not it's primarily intended for workforce or not, but as they are not the same as the school district, they would not be able to take advantage of AB 2295, which seems to be the golden ticket here.
That is correct. And Rachel, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but that's my understanding of.
Yeah, yes, it is available for school districts specifically as an allowable use. I would caution about the golden ticket though, because those are some pretty strict standards that a project has to meet. So that's a tall order, which, you know, from this, it's not pertinent to totally dig into all these parameters in this project, but certainly the board would be looking at, like, realistically, can we develop a project that will meet this criteria list, all of the criteria? But yeah.
Great. thank you. So I'm gonna go Phyllis and then Kathy.
Well, actually, thank you. That was my second question, that AB 2295, we don't want, if we didn't want to lose that eligibility, we would have to keep it on the rolls of the district. And you answered the question. Thank you.
Right, thank you. Kathy?
Yeah, I wanted to just make sure I understand, John, the reason that continuing to own the property and not using it for storage causes this problem is that their theory is you could sell that land and get the proceeds, and yet you're asking us for money. Is that the theory?
I think I lost you on that, Kathy. I'm sorry. Can you say that again?
Well, you said that one disadvantage to leasing is that it makes it hard to apply for state funds.
Yes.
And I'm trying to understand why, what the rationale is.
Yeah, just it's the regulations under the Office of Public School Construction as well as the State Allocation Board. Their feeling is that if you have property that is just sitting there and you're not using it, then you really don't need to be rebuilding any other schools or things like that, even though this site has been deemed unsafe to operate as a school site.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I guess my last question is whether it's reasonable, you know, we're trying to stay in our lane and I get all that, but is it reasonable to ask for some superficial analysis of whether this site automatically does not meet any of those 10 criteria? I guess I'd be interested to know if we're like, we know we're out, because then AB 2295 isn't really relevant to us.
So I mean, we can take a pass at it, right? But staff can't put too much work into doing the analysis and studying it. I know that you understand that. The biggest challenge that we're going to have with AB 2295 and the criteria that's set forward is it talks specifically about a certain percentage being in that low income, and then a certain percentage being in the median income, et cetera. And as you may remember, Kathy, because you were very involved in helping us, you know, kind of put together the whole workforce housing project to begin with, we had to petition the board, the board had to petition city council to actually go up to 120% of the AMI so that our teachers would qualify to live in there. So the problem is, and I think Rachel might have said this earlier, is that while employees who work for school districts don't make a whole lot of money, they do make more money than typically what the AMI for low income, particularly in Alameda County, is. So based on that, I don't know, and again, we can do a superficial analysis of it, but based on remembering what those AMI numbers are, and knowing sort of where our salary schedules are, I don't think we would necessarily qualify under 2295 for this for a large number of homes. Now, be that as it may, it's just sort of a knee-jerk, you know, it's sort of my gut talking to me. We haven't studied it.
Well, there's another way of putting that that may be helpful to people, which is that to meet that criteria, we'd really be talking about housing for our classified employees. And everybody should know that. It
would be really the lowest paid of our classified employees at that, because even many of our classified employees would actually exceed the low income threshold that we would have to meet. I think it was 30% under 2295.
Yeah, so I think that is important for people to know. And I've never been clear. I mean, I'm sure with the pandemic, we have serious recruitment and retention problems, not just with teachers, but also with classified staff. So
that's absolutely right.
You know, that it's a good end on its own. The only other thing I want to say is that if the land is sold and we recommend please sell it to a developer that will do workforce housing for classified staff, they would have to meet all the city's requirements, and the lot is not currently zoned for more than a single family home. I mean,
Correct.
parcels of single-family homes.
So
I
they
think.
would have to go through and make an application to the local jurisdiction to change zoning, and may, depending on how things are set up, may require general plan amendment. That's where you would have kind of a variety. You may have the planning committee, you may have the city council is going to ultimately make the decision, and you may have some public hearings with respect to that. So that's part of this process that, to the extent it's going to be a district doing all of this, that's what they're trying to help you speed up, because that can take a long time.
Thanks.
Dietmar, and then I have a follow-up about that too. Go for it, Dietmar.
Sure, yeah. And so I think, as you know, workforce housing is being worked on at the adult school side. I think the developers that do that, they have the numbers down so well, they can just probably look at that and give you a very like basically a thumbs up or thumbs down. My initial read on that, I just looked back on the criteria. 50% is average income, which is 80% AMI. Only 30% needs to be low income, which is under 80. And the other 50%, they could be anything. So I think from what I have seen from affordable housing projects, this is a pretty generous formula, actually. And I think often the higher income is not only to allow, you know, people with higher incomes to be accommodated in those, you know, like more higher seniority teachers, for example, but it's also for the project to pencil out for the developer that you're working with, you know. So there might be the same 3-bedroom apartment that's rented to somebody for $1,500 and for somebody else for $4,000, depending on means testing, basically. So, but my initial read on that, having looked at other projects and having gone through these criteria, or these 10 criteria, I don't see anything glaringly saying red flag, this won't work. But I think this should be, as we're doing this recommendation, it doesn't seem to be rocket science to at least get to a point of being roughly right as opposed to completely wrong. And I think that's something we should look at. Is there something that's glaringly a red flag, and focus on that? And I don't think it's rocket science to answer that, at least to a very high degree of confidence.
Thank you, Dietmar. I'm going to say something, then I'll hand it over to you, Kate. My question was, when they do, if it's single family, it's zoned for single family, right now. And if they want to convert workforce housing, is part of the process the city has to go through the safety, the traffic, the emergency vehicle, is that part of what they have to?
That would be kind of some of the things that, again, the city or the people in the planning department that would do the research and look into this and kind of help make a recommendation for the city council. I'm sure they would be considering a variety, all those variety of concerns that you just noted.
Okay, that was one of my questions. Thank you, Kate, and then Stephanie.
I guess this sort of goes to Dietmar's point, but you know, the recommendation that we're making is advisory anyways. And we can make more than one recommendation too. We don't want to put something forward that is absurd and never going to happen, but we're also not responsible for making sure that we have a very clear path for implementing this. So, you know, we could probably spend a lot of time debating all kinds of nuances about how likely certain things are. But if the preponderance of the evidence suggests this would be a good use, it seems like there's potentially a path forward. We may not need to spend that much time detailing, you know, have we crossed every T, dotted every I to confirm that this could happen, and still have it show up as a good recommendation in our final document.
Thank you, Kate. Stephanie?
Well, first of all, I want to thank Kate because I don't want to be in the position of trying to design a recommendation of how the district could build workforce housing there, or a developer could. I mean, frankly, I don't think that's our responsibility or our ability. I'm really focused on the district being able to surplus this property and sell it, because I'm not sure people are aware of the fact that we are running into a significant potential shortfall in the bond for the Berkeley Community Theater. And this is a potential big problem for all of the projects left in the bond. And so I think it's wonderful if we say surplus it and the district says we want to sell it to a developer and we hope they build workforce housing. Fantastic. But I don't want to get into the weeds on developing workforce housing. It's not our job and it's not our expertise. And frankly, I think it's a waste of time. But it might be because I've had a long, hard day and I'm tired. So.
Thank you, Stephanie. I can appreciate that. Chasing 270 kids around all day.
Yeah.
Other questions? This is a great time to clarify. I think your points are well made about we're making a recommendation. Dietmar?
Yeah, so like reacting to Stephanie's statement, I mean, I wouldn't be too happy for this land just to be sold to, just fix up the community theater. I think there need to be other funding sources for that. And I'm looking at it from a big picture perspective of a city that has as a main policy goal urban infill and growth. That means more population, that means more children. And the scarce good is land. And we won't do bay filling to create more land for schools. And we're currently having a situation unfolding right now where workforce housing is placed on a viable school site. Actually, one of the few, maybe the only large school site that could accommodate future, K through 12 education. And, my involvement in that was always pushing towards a distributed solution and looking for sites that do not conflict with the core educational purpose. And well, here is a site like that. And so I think I would be very reluctant to give this up. And especially with, if as it seems, AB 2295 is a viable path to actually develop this. And so I think that's an opportunity not to be missed. Once it's gone and sold, it's a different thing if you sell it and then buy another piece of land that might be more suitable. That's a different discussion and maybe not in our competence here to look at. But my recommendation would still be the recommendation to look into workforce housing on the side.
Well, and I think Rachel did cover that earlier when she said that there can actually be one or multiple recommendations to the board about, declaring it surplus and what to do. And I think that is a good option to recommend to the board, Dietmar.
Yeah. Thank you. Stephanie?
Well, I don't want to rain on Dietmar's parade here, but there aren't a lot of revenue sources. And the district's first responsibility is to its students. And the Berkeley High School serves the entire city and all the students in the city. It's not a minor side event here. And is supportive of of workforce housing as a critical factor for teachers and staff. It's impossible to ignore what's going on at Berkeley High and the community theater and the little theater. And I'm sure other people perhaps aren't as aware of it as I am, but it's extremely important. If we can generate a significant amount of money by the sale of this property to support that project, it'll make a huge difference to the students of this district.
Thank you, Stephanie. I raised my hand to make sure I got in order. I wanted to give an example of what surplus, lower it, when Hillside was sold, how the schools benefited. We talk about the community theater, but a big portion of the money, and I don't know the exact dollar amount, went to support technology at the school sites.
That's right.
Which in the past, especially with the pandemic, was huge. Chromebooks, support for teachers, just building in that whole infrastructure and technology, I don't know how it would have happened without that. So in that regard, having that income really benefited us, and it's fine for me. I don't mind if it doesn't go to general fund, but I like it for these sort of capital improvements like that. How that's determined, that's the school board, I would imagine, but that technology that, served our kids incredible and continues to serve our kids.
So just so you know, it was actually an application that was done through the California Department of Education to allow us to use the money for that, because otherwise it would have had to have gone right to capital projects. But the point that you're making, Beth, is absolutely relevant in the sense of that, once the property was sold, district staff and the board worked together to really say, okay, what are these incredible needs? And while there is obviously facilities needs and capital projects needs, at that time, the need for technology was so great that we actually did the application for CDE, which allowed the money to go into several special funds, including funding technology to get us closer to that 1-to-1 ratio.
Thank you. Phyllis?
Yes, I was just wondering, so the appraiser thought it was worth $2 million. How much did Hillside sell for?
Oh,
I
It
think
was 1.5 or 1.6.
I was going to say 1.5 or 1.6, but that was a decade ago. It was a long time ago.
10 years
So
ago. Yeah.
So I guess my question is, what will $2 million buy us now?
Can't answer that question here.
Yeah,
Because the reality is, no, I get that it's rhetorical, but the reality is that the ed code says that the money goes back to capital projects, right?
Right, but
Or
you did
to
do the
support-
application.
But at this, no, without an application, but the board or other staff at the cabinet level, right, could have the conversations then to say, this is what's really needed in the district, right, to best support our students, because that's why we're here, right? So $2 million in the grand scheme of facilities and capital projects, while it helps, when you think of $2 million for special projects, it actually goes a really long way, like it did with technology.
Great. Dietmar, go for it.
Yeah, so my daughter just performed her flute quartet at the Little Theater 2 or 3 weeks ago. So I was just in there, and it's a great venue, and obviously these things need to be maintained. But I like to kind of keep the focus on the multi-decades view, not the operational crisis that we have this month or in next March or something like that. There's always going to be little holes that you want to fill. And I think one really needs to have the financial discipline and long-term view. And, having 2 kids that, have gone or are still going through the district, what I don't like to see is school sites being kind of covered over with portable units. If there's an increase of students right now, they say, why do we need more space? Because after COVID, kids, moved on or went somewhere else, enrollment dropped. It's always like looking at the crisis right in front of you. And right now that doesn't seem to be a crisis. But if you have a city that is moving from 100-something thousand inhabitants to 150 or more, it's a very different kind of animal. And so what was my critique in this first round of workforce housing, that for the lack of better opportunities, viable school sites get butchered to create workforce housing. And so if there is an acknowledgement that we do need workforce housing, not just because the mayor dangled a $100,000 grant for an initial study, but if we really mean it, then we need to look at sites like that rather than sacrificing viable school sites. And that, I think, is the true interest and importance for the interest of our future students.
Stephanie?
Well, the Little Theater is where about 90% of what Berkeley High does when they need a performance space. It needs significant upgrades. It's a nice space, but it needs significant upgrades. We cannot do those upgrades because DSA has now mandated that we have to do the seismic upgrades of the bowl and the theater before we can do anything else. This is not a current thing. This is going to serve the school for decades. We're not going to spend this kind of money on the A building and the community theater and the little theater again for decades. This is the first upgrade that's been done in about 30 or 40 years already. It's a huge project that is central to a lot of the programming at the high school. Dietmar's daughter would have had a much better experience if both the lighting, the sound, and the seats had been upgraded in there. We can't do it until we comply with the DSA mandate. And I have my eye on that because it's a huge, expensive project and essential to what the high school is doing. And the housing crisis is not one that the district is going to solve outside of building the workforce housing it can build down on San Pablo. I don't know if anybody knows how difficult, how expensive and complicated that is. It's not like, oh, good, now we'll build workforce housing up there. No, sorry. That's a fantasy.
Okay, Kate, did you change your mind?
I think the point of clarification was that we're not recommending how resources get used if there is revenue from sale of the land, right? So
No.
the debate we're having is, do we want to restrict it for workforce housing or say workforce housing or highest value to support BUSD capital needs?
And my understanding is we can make more than one recommendation.
Yeah,
We might
exactly.
put 1, 2, 3 if we look at that form. So I think there are options. I wanted to add a couple things when, in response to, I think this is a good time. We're still ahead of schedule. When we look at, if we talk about workforce housing, we're not talking about doing it at Oxford versus San Pablo, right? Dietmar, that's not, it would be in addition to. So I think that is something to consider, to keep in mind. If we do it there, it doesn't mean it necessarily doesn't happen there. That's not our decision either. If we really want to look at schools' capacity, I do believe there are, if we're worried about where schools are going down the road, I can tell you there are rooms at current school sites without putting portables on. Not a fan of portables, but I know there is room for growth more than just 10 or 20 kids. So, and that's something the district's going to have to look at too down the road. The other thing, I don't know what that note was. Just a little sidebar. I asked several teachers, I was sort of curious at school today and yesterday and said, so if they had workforce housing at the old site, would you want to live there? And I was a little surprised. Most of them went, I don't know. Some already have homes elsewhere. So that was sort of a moot point. But I said, if you didn't, and they had the concern about the slide, and obviously it would be built to be safe, but they were still a little bit, they didn't embrace it as much as I would have thought, which, it's just an informal, asking 8 teachers, but something to think about. Is it the ideal spot for workforce housing? I don't know. That's just my little sidebar. Are there any other comments or sharings? I appreciate it. I think this is an interesting conversation to have for all of us. So I appreciate it, even if we have differing opinions. If not, I think we could. Oh, Kate, go for it.
It's actually not about the future use. It's about the process for completing the report document after our next meeting. I mean, I presume we'll continue this conversation about what the recommendation should be. Do we mark up the draft document that was shared if there are sort of edits on the little details and the preamble and that kind of thing, or what is the process for that?
Yeah, and that can be a bit fluid, but certainly the way that I've seen it most commonly done is a chair or vice chair will take a swap, you'll email them about your requested edits or whatever, and they'll kind of compile them into the document. But certainly you could elect someone else to do it, or you could say, hey, we just wouldn't want like a document with 7 or 8 different track changes on it. We kind of want to make it so that it's one thing so that you're not spinning your wheels. But certainly it is available. It's a document for this committee to review and change, and to the extent that they want, make it your own.
Yeah, there's a lot of potential changes with so many committee members. And there's a lot of work to be done to change that, right? And understanding what Beth's commitments are, obviously, as the school site principal, as well as Dietmar, as the co-chair. What I would offer, and this is really at the discretion of the committee because this is the committee's work, but we have to avoid a serial meeting, right? Having conversations through email. But if each committee member actually wanted to take a stab at just sort of making a recommendation, and then send that in, to us, staff could actually try to compile that and then give it back to you. I want to be very careful, though, and very clear in saying that staff is not going to drive the recommendation, right? What we're offering up is really just an opportunity to sort of compile your thoughts, and then actually give it back to the chair and co-chair to sort of take a look at, and they can even verify and validate that with any of the emails that have come in, because what we don't want is the appearance that staff is driving that, but we do have the bandwidth to do that for you all.
I think that's a great idea. And then Dietmar, you and I can meet, and hopefully with Jennifer and or Rachel, to sort of put that together. I think that's super
Yeah, and I was thinking in regards to what John was saying, we can also, outline whose recommendations are in what section, so that when a committee looks at it as a whole, that everyone can see the input that was from the entire committee would be in one document. To John's point, we're not surfacing any violations of the Brown Act that way.
Right.
great. We have a couple more questions. Kathy, and then, or comments, Kathy, and then Phyllis.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about how stressful it can be to meet a deadline, and especially with Zoom and all that. So I was hoping that before our next meeting, we could get an email with a link to the revised document. So before the meeting, we could look at the document that reflects all the input that's been provided. I think that'll help things go a lot faster, and, reduce some of the stress.
Kathy, would you want the people's input to be on that or a separate document? Do you know what I mean?
No, I'm talking about a document that incorporates the input.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think
And I
as
don't know
a,
about attaching names. I think that may be problematic. I don't know that I think that's so important. It's just sort of, here's the new draft prior to the meeting. Otherwise, we're going to go through it in the meeting, and we can do that, but it may just take a long time.
I think we can keep a master copy where I would want to keep a master copy where we attach a name, right, to each recommendation that we keep, and we can share with the chair and the vice chair. I wouldn't want to necessarily share that out to create any dissension on it, but I would like to keep that for purposes of that way it avoids the appearance later that staff drove this decision. This really is an independent committee, and we want the committee to make that recommendation. What we're offering to do is really just to help to sort of take everybody's thoughts and put it down into paper, because having gone through this before, we understand it is a huge lift. It's almost Herculean, especially for someone who is an active site principal. Everyone on this call is very busy, right? And we get that. So we're just, again, it's an offer that's we're putting out there to try to help with that.
So if we're going to do that, and then I'm going to come to you, Phyllis. Our meeting is on the 11th. We would need that, significantly before. So what if it was the 5th? Ooh, that's a little tight for me. How about January 4th? Only because could people send us their input by January? I'll go for the 5th, January 5th. And I don't know, it would help for me to have sort of the format, what it would look like, right? Do people need that, or is that just me?
Mm-hmm. No. So we do have that
in the San Leandro report. If you
Oh,
look
okay.
at that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, all we're
That's
going to
gonna
do is
send out.
basically modify that report to work for Berkeley.
Okay.
That's the framework that'll be used though.
Okay,
This is really tying into all this. I think 2 meetings ago, we were worried about the Brown Act of us emailing each other, too many people on the same email chain. And I thought we were going to set up a Google area that you can go and post stuff to that we could all read without it being a communication to one another.
But
So in other
that would
words-
actually create that violation. So we have an email, Phyllis, where you guys can all email your thoughts regarding this into the district, and then we will compile it for you. If we were to set up like a Google Workspace, for example, as you're suggesting, then that actually does become a serial meeting within that workspace. And Rachel, please chime in here if you need to.
Well,
but because you and Dietmar, for example, are working on a piece of it, and then Beth reads it.
No, it'd just be view only. No interaction.
But if you're still reading the work product of each other as you're changing it, right? You're having that secondary meeting, right?
I would actually, no, I just suggest that, so if people, what Beth was saying is, could we see what everybody's done? Okay, if when people, before the 5th, if people could do what they were doing and throw it up there, you could take the names off even, just so the people could see what else had been done. It doesn't have to be me working with Dietmar. It would be
Rachel,
just
yeah, and
I think
since
that
we have
that would
legal
be
counsel,
problematic because you're like working on the committee's business outside of the committee, and you're getting multiple inputs from different committee members, right? So Phyllis, you're gonna, what I think is gonna happen that's gonna be useful to you is Jennifer, after this meeting, is gonna send you the BUSD template that you saw, the Cupertino template, and then you are going to have those templates that you can access and literally write in, A, if you have red lines that you want to do to them, or B, these are the 3 recommendations that I want to see in the report. And then someone at the district team is going to make a compilation of that so that you can, work through it quickly at the next meeting. And if one of the concerns is like, hey, I don't want to be saying the same thing as someone else. Well, if we see that 3 people are saying workforce housing recommendation, that's fine. That just kind of speeds up the process, and you just pick which one sounds the best. You vote on which one sounds the best.
If people can get those to us, let's see, if you can get it to us at the latest, let's see. Oh, okay. So if you can get it to us by the 31st, Jennifer says, she can compile the comments and we can send a draft, a revised draft. We'll come to the meeting or agenda packet. So we'll get it.
What I was thinking is sorry, Beth, if everybody sends the comments to the capital projects by the 31st, I know it's the holiday, but kind of to Phyllis's point and some of the other committee members' point, we could staff can compile that, set time up with a chair and vice chair, but get that out to the committee as soon as possible. So if there was potentially an item that might be missing, or you had additional thought, you could bring that to the meeting and have a little bit of extra time. Again, whatever comments you have, they will potentially be incorporated as part of the process, but it is just trying to get it all in there a little bit ahead of time for you.
And when will the stuff be that you got, the templates, when will that be posted?
The draft report, the sample was sent out in the packet. And so I'll make sure, like I said earlier, that by tomorrow morning, I send out the draft template from that Rachel sent, and then we'll also send out the BUSD template. So tomorrow you'll have that.
Dietmar, you have a question?
Yeah, Jennifer, when you send this out, could you also include, please, the email address where we should, email recommendations?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. I'll send, some different options of how you can send the recommendations in.
Okay. All right. Sounds like we have a plan moving forward. Yay. Dietmar, do you have another question? Your hand.
Yes, I just want to compliment you for running. You're really getting the hang of it, for running this so efficiently and like keeping everything moving. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Well, thank you all. Thank you for your time and your support. I appreciate your kind words. I feel like we're making progress and I really appreciate it. And even if we have different opinions about things, that's what this committee is for. So I really appreciate it. And thank heavens for all her support, Jennifer, making sure I know what to do. All right. So with that, if we're good, is there someone, I think we have to move.
I move to close. I so move.
Second.
All right, thank you. So we had Phyllis and Kate. All right, everybody, you're good?
Thank you all.
So
Thanks,
send those
everybody.
emails.
Happy holidays.
From the
Yeah,
district,
happy
as always,
holidays,
thank you
everyone.
for your time, everyone, and happy holidays.
All right, thanks,
Bye.
everybody.